History is often shaped by those who write it. Some figures become household names, while others, despite their significance, fade into obscurity. Britain's long and complex past is filled with rulers, warriors, scholars, and revolutionaries whose stories have been forgotten or misunderstood. Hundreds of historical figures have shaped its history. Some challenged the status quo, others conquered kingdoms, and others achieved greatness only to have their stories buried by time. Keep watching to uncover the lives of some of Britain's most fascinating yet overlooked and misunderstood historical figures. Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians. Æthelflæd, the daughter of Alfred the Great, was one of the most influential rulers of the Anglo-Saxon period. She ruled Mercia in the 10th century, leading military campaigns, fortifying towns, and playing a crucial role in defending England from Viking invasions. She was born around 870 into a war of survival against Viking invaders and grew up in a realm teetering on the brink of disaster. In 878, when Æthelflæd was about 8 years old, the entire royal family was forced to flee their home to the swamps of Somerset. Just months later, her father, Alfred the Great, won a stunning victory over the Vikings at the Battle of Edington. Unfortunately, that would not be the end of their struggle against the Vikings. When Æthelflæd was 16, she was married to Æthelred, Lord of the Mercians, to strengthen the alliance between Mercia and Alfred the Great's Wessex. Together, they were the last Saxon kingdoms resisting a complete Viking victory. For a while, there was an uneasy peace between the two kingdoms and the Vikings. However, that peace ended with Alfred the Great's death in 899, and the region was thrown into conflict again. Æthelflæd's reputation grew as her husband's health declined, and she took on more leadership responsibilities. She spearheaded projects and treaties and even had military campaigns conducted in her name. She was known as a skilled negotiator and a strong leader. Her achievements were extraordinary, especially for a woman of the time. When her husband died around 911, the nobles of Mercia accepted that Æthelflæd should become the sole ruler, the Lady of the Mercians. Once she was queen, she made even more strides to protect her kingdom. She fortified towns, secured roads and rivers, and continued trying to negotiate with the Vikings. Notably, she never remarried, perhaps unwilling to give up her power as sole ruler. Over the years, her army defeated both Welsh and Viking raiders, spreading her fame worldwide. She also made peace with the people of Alba and the Britons, who lived in what are now Scotland and Wales. A year before her death, she led her armies to victory over the Vikings one last time at Derby. After she died from illness at about age 47, her daughter briefly succeeded the throne as the second Lady of the Mercians, but King Edward took her into Wessex and imposed direct rule on Mercia, merging the two kingdoms. Although another king later took over her kingdom, Æthelflæd had saved her kingdom from Viking defeat and made a name for herself. Historians speculate that she must have had an incredible force of personality to overcome the gender roles and assumptions of the time. Her success as a ruler in a male-dominated period shows just how awe-inspiring she was. Despite her achievements and fierce reputation, she was almost lost to history. The primary source for her period, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, has several versions. The most common version, written in Wessex under the reign of King Edward, almost erases her from existence. It concentrates instead on King Edward's achievements. Luckily, other versions were preserved, and her history was merely overlooked, not lost. Owain Glyndŵr. Owain Glyndŵr was a fierce warrior who led a rebellion against English rule in the early 15th century, declaring Welsh independence and establishing a parliament. England painted him as a traitor in its history books, or even dismissed him as a failed rebel or a nuisance to the crown. To the Welsh people, however, his story is worth much more than that. Owain Glyndŵr was born around 1354 or 1359 in North Wales and had royal lineage on both sides of his family. Today, he is best known for instigating a 15-year-long revolt against the rule of King Henry IV of England in 1400. He earned a series of victories against the English and captured castles across Wales, reclaiming control of most of his country. He wasn't alone in his rebellion either. He received naval support from Scotland and Brittany and promises of troops from Charles VI, the King of France. Although the revolution seemed to be going in Glyndŵr's favor, the tide began to turn by 1407. The English started to overrun the Welsh, reconquering much of the country within just 2 years. Glyndŵr is said to have fought vigilantly until he was cornered at Harlech Castle, which was under siege by the English. Allegedly, he escaped by disguising himself as an old man and leaving the castle. He walked right past the English blockade before retreating into the Welsh countryside with a band of loyal supporters. After escaping the English, he was only seen a few more times as he occasionally raided or ambushed near the border. His last recorded sighting was in 1412 when he ambushed the king's men. Twice, he ignored a pardon from Henry V, and despite enormous rewards for his capture, he was never betrayed by the English. By the time he died, supposedly around 1415, he had a legendary status similar to King Arthur. His final resting place is still unknown, but Welsh legend has it that when Wales is threatened again, he will rise to lead the defense of Wales. English historians often dismissed him as a traitor rather than recognizing his legitimate claim and vision for an independent Wales. His story was almost entirely erased from mainstream British history until decades later when national movements sought to revive his legacy. Now, he is ranked as the second greatest Welsh hero of all time. Thomas Clarkson. Thomas Clarkson was one of the most dedicated and influential figures in Britain's abolitionist movement. He gathered evidence of the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and tirelessly lobbied for its abolition. Yet William Wilberforce, who presented the abolitionist arguments in Parliament, often overshadowed his role. Born in March 1760 in Cambridgeshire, England, Thomas Clarkson was a fierce abolitionist and one of the first effective publicists of the movement against the slave trade and slavery in the British colonies. Although he was ordained a deacon, he devoted his life to abolitionism instead. In 1786, he wrote an essay on the slavery and commerce of the human species, which brought him into contact with other foes of slavery, including the more famous William Wilberforce. In Clarkson's research for a pamphlet written by William Wilberforce called A Summary View of the Slave Trade and the Probable Consequences of its Abolition, he visited British ports to collect facts. The evidence and information he gathered were later invaluable to the anti-slavery campaign led by William Wilberforce in Parliament. In 1807, a bill for the abolition of the slave trade was finally passed. The following year, Clarkson's 2-volume history of the slave trade was published. Partially due to Clarkson's efforts, the condemnation of the trade by other European powers was secured, and measures for enforcing international abolition were discussed, although they were not implemented. In 1823, the Anti-Slavery Society was founded, and Clarkson was elected vice president. While Wilberforce became the face of abolition due to his political role, and Clarkson did not see the limelight like he did, his activism, research, and campaigning were just as crucial. Although his contributions have often been minimized in favor of a more simplistic narrative of a lone hero leading the movement, they were still invaluable to the cause. Although he did not earn the same fame as Wilberforce, his efforts were every bit as crucial. Mary Seacole. Mary Seacole was a Jamaican-British nurse and businesswoman who provided medical care to soldiers during the Crimean War. Despite facing racial discrimination, she established the British Hotel near the front lines, offering wounded soldiers food, supplies, and medical assistance. However, her story has often been distorted or ignored in favor of Florence Nightingale's. She was born in Jamaica more than 2 centuries ago when many black people in the area were enslaved. Although Mary's mother was black, her father, James Grant, was a white Scottish Army officer, and Mary was born a free person. In her autobiography, she wrote that she always wanted to be a nurse. As a child, she would practice what little medicine she knew on her doll. At 15, Mary moved to England for a year to stay with her family. She took this opportunity to acquire knowledge about modern European medicine, supplementing the traditional Caribbean techniques she learned from her mother. Years later, Mary went to London alone. While there, she experienced racial prejudice and was often the victim of racial insults and other aggressions. She lived in London for 2 years before leaving, visiting Cuba, Haiti, and the Bahamas before returning home to Kingston. In 1836, she married Edwin Seacole, and they owned a store together until he died in 1844. She lived a full life before earning her reputation during the Crimean War. She began to make a name for herself in 1853 at the beginning of the Crimean War. When she heard of the war, she traveled to England and went to the British War Office, asking to be sent to Crimea as an army nurse. She was refused. Resolved, she funded her own trip to Crimea, where she established the British Hotel with Thomas Day, a relative of her late husband. The hotel was a place of rest for sick and recovering soldiers. and Mary became well known in Britain for her kind-heartedness and skill as a nurse. Unlike Florence Nightingale's military hospital, which was hundreds of miles from the front line, Mary's hotel was much closer to the fighting. She was able to visit the battlefield, sometimes under fire, to nurse the wounded. Reportedly, she so kindly nursed sick soldiers that they called her Mother Seacole. When the war ended in 1856, Mary returned to Britain with little money but an incredible reputation spread by the soldiers she'd nursed. They wrote letters to the newspapers praising what she had done. And one war correspondent wrote in the Times that he believed England would never forget the woman who nursed the sick and sought out the wounded to aid them. In 1857, a fundraising gala was held for her, and over 80,000 people attended. The same year, she published an autobiography, The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. However, her legacy faded when she died in 1881, and she was lost to history for the next century. Victorian historians largely dismissed Seacole's contributions because she did not fit their image of a respectable British nurse. When she was depicted, it was often as a mere entrepreneur rather than a dedicated caregiver who risked her life to help soldiers. Her history almost disappeared entirely because after her death, her legacy faded due to factors including racial prejudice and being overshadowed by the more widely recognized Florence Nightingale. However, in 1991, her incredible story was rediscovered when nurses from the Caribbean visited her grave. Since then, she has regained some of the fame she deserves. In 2004, she was voted the greatest Black Briton, and her statue was finally unveiled in 2016 on the grounds of St. Thomas's Hospital in London. Forgotten Legacies. These four figures left an undeniable mark on British history, yet their stories have been misrepresented, downplayed, or erased in mainstream narratives. We are lucky to have any record of their stories at all. Whether due to cultural bias, gender, politics, or deliberate historical omission, their contributions faded from shared memory and were nearly lost. These figures are just a few of those forgotten by historians. There are even more incredible people whose stories have been overshadowed, misunderstood, or entirely left out of history. By rediscovering their stories, we better understand Britain's past and the diverse individuals who shaped it. They remind us that we can only know so much about our history. It is shaped by what historians decided to write, which records were preserved, and what evidence was left behind. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Britain and its important historical figures, check out our book, British History, a captivating guide to the story of Britain, the Britons, and the Battle of Britain. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.